loved with an everlasting love. That's what the Bible says. And underneath are the everlasting arms. Some of you may have heard me say those words on the radio, and I am extremely grateful for the privilege of broadcasting. It's certainly something that I never imagined doing. And I was about a year and a half old, I gather, when KPOF was started. And I don't think it was less than 6 years or so later that somebody gave us a huge Atwater Kent radio. I can remember how exciting that was. It was a great big thing about this big that my father brought into the living room. And of course, we listened on very carefully chosen occasions. But Sunday nights, we always listened to the old-fashioned revival hour. And I can remember how Rudy Atwood played the piano. We have heard the joyful sound. I can remember Dr. Charles E. Fuller singing, "Heavenly sunshine, heavenly sun." Anybody here remember that? And then, "Dear Mrs. Fuller, I have a letter here from a little sheep herder way up in the mountains of Colorado." And we just loved that program. And then the only other program that I can remember listening to, and of course it was always with our parents' permission, we didn't get to listen to much else. There was a black church in Philadelphia, and they could sing like nobody I'd ever heard in my life. And I'm so glad that we had this wonderful quartet over here this afternoon. But they sang a song called "When I Take My Vacation in Heaven." What a wonderful time that would be. I thought you might like to have some idea of how in the world I managed to get on the radio. As I said, I never imagined doing it, and I'd had nothing to do with getting this enviable position. But a young woman who was in her 20s had come to the Urbana Missionary Convention a number of years ago when I happened to be one of the speakers. And as a result of going there, she began to correspond with me, and a few months or perhaps a year or so later, she went to Ecuador to work with radio station HCJB in Quito. And while she was in Ecuador, she got to know some of my missionary friends and even began to write me letters about her enjoying those friends, and sent me a tape on one occasion where several of these friends had greeted me on the tape, and then she talked to me. And when she came back to the States, I invited her to come to a small seminar that I was doing in Georgia. I still had no recollection of seeing this girl. I just, she was one of 17,000 students or so that time when I spoke, but we had been corresponding. So when I decided that I was going to have this small seminar in Georgia, it was by invitation only, and I was picking out the young women that I had met that I felt would like to have a few days of what we might call spiritual mothering. And so Jan was one of those girls who came, and I talked for 5 days, practically all day, every day. I guess it was about a half a day every day, just giving them the great principles of the Christian life as I had been taught them. I don't think Jan said anything at all to me about what had occurred in her mind, but she was living in Nebraska, and she went to the people at Back to the Bible and asked them if they had a women's program, and they said, "No, we've been looking for one." And she said, "Well, I think I know who you should get." And they said, "Well, it makes a big difference who the person is, so who do you have in mind?" She said, "Well, I think you should ask Elisabeth Elliot." And they said, "Well, do you think we could get her?" And she said, "I think we could." After that, of course, I found out that she had done this. It wasn't very long before I had a letter from the people in Lincoln inviting my husband and me to go there to discuss the possibility of a radio broadcast. When I got there, without any forewarning whatsoever, they said, "We would like you to do 20 programs today and tomorrow." I'd never done a radio program in my life, and they told me I had 11 and a half minutes for each one. And somehow or other, I did 20 programs, and that was the beginning. And it will be 10 years next October for me. I can hardly believe that I've been on the radio that long. Well, I'm certainly not here to talk to you about broadcasting. I feel as though I don't really know anything at all about it. I just talk, But I do want to talk about a principle, a very useful principle in my life. Do the next thing. Life does get tedious, doesn't it? My first husband, Jim Elliott, used to sing a song. He could play a guitar a little bit. He played a harmonic a little bit better. But he used to sing a song called Life Gets Tedious. And the only two lines that I can remember are, if you open the door, the flies come in. You shut the door, and you're sweating again. Life gets tedious, don't it? Well, life does get complicated and bewildering for most of us at different times, and sometimes frantic, and we just don't quite know what to do. Sometimes it seems as though our lives are getting chaotic. And I remember how often my father reminded us of what it says in 1 Corinthians 14:40, that everything is to be done decently and in order. And I thank God for very godly parents, 7-day-a-week kind of parents. Actually, I should mention who my father was, because there might be some white-haired people here who would remember him. He was the editor of the only non-denominational Christian magazine in this country at that time. As far as we know, the magazine was called the Sunday School Times. Anybody here who ever heard of the Sunday School Times? Thank you so much. Well, my great-grandfather was the editor at one time, then my grandfather was the president of the company, my great-uncle was the next editor, and my father was the next editor after that. And he was a very humble, very godly, wonderful man, and taught us neatness. And he would not tolerate chaos in the home, even though there were 6 of us children. It was a peaceful home, an orderly home, and we were reminded of that verse. Things are to be done decently and in order. Now, if we are going to gain anything from the principle of doing the next thing, we are going to have to be teachable. And since we are surrounded, as we're told in Hebrews 12, by a great cloud of witnesses, we're told that we are to throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles, and that we are to run the race with perseverance, the race that is marked out for us. Let us fix our eyes on Jesus, who is the author and the perfecter of our faith. Another translation says the pioneer and perfecter, or the source and the goal of our faith. And it has always been my purpose as I broadcast to help my listeners to remember to look to Jesus. Teachability. I hope that it's something that we never lose in our old age. And I hope that everyone here is teachable. Meekness, I think, is teachability. Jesus learned obedience by the things that he suffered. And Jesus certainly set the example to us of meekness. And the Bible says that Moses was the meekest man that ever lived. And we would hardly think of Moses as being a weak man. Unfortunately, people often confuse those two terms. But this principle of do the next thing has been for me one of the most calming, quieting, comforting, and simplifying principles in my life. But as I sort of unpack what I think this lesson is to you, it may not sound very spiritual to some of you, but I certainly believe that it is. And it's always my purpose to link the spiritual principles with our ordinary everyday lives, because I do believe that everything is an affair of the Spirit. Absolutely everything. And nothing is secular to a child of God. We belong to Jesus Christ, body, soul, and mind. So whatever the work may be that God has given us to do, whether it's laundry and cooking and cleaning, or a desk job perhaps, or maybe you're a cattle rancher or something, whatever the job may be that may not look like a spiritual opportunity, if it's offered to Jesus Christ, it is transformed and becomes material for sacrifice. And that has just comforted me so much because, of course, my life is not just writing and speaking and broadcasting. I clean the bathtub and I cook for my husband and I iron shirts and do all those ordinary things. But it doesn't make any difference to God whether I'm sitting at my computer working on a piece of writing perhaps, or whether I'm standing at the kitchen sink and peeling carrots for the soup. If that's the thing I'm supposed to be doing at that moment, then that, of course, is what God is pleased with. Teachability is not so difficult if we really want to learn a particular thing. When you took music lessons, you did it, if not because your parents made you, because you wanted to do it. If you want to learn to play tennis, or you want to lose weight, or you want to learn how in the world to work a computer, then you try to get somebody that can teach you how to do it. And you're willing to be teachable, but we're not always willing to be teachable by the people that God wants to teach us through. And we wives are not necessarily always eager to hear our husbands teaching and correcting. So I don't know what your particular need may be this afternoon, but I know the one who knows. And I trust that he will give me words that will be helpful to you. The author of a poem, of this little poem, which is where the principle of do the next thing came from, is that very ubiquitous person whose name is unknown, anonymous. But this is, my mother had taught me this principle, do the next thing. And then when I went away to boarding school at the age of 14, lo and behold, the headmistress of the school told us the same thing, do the next thing. So it was again and again that simple principle was dinned into my head. I really didn't pay much attention to it, and I didn't obey it very often. But in my old age, I am so grateful for it. And it turned out after my mother died that I discovered in her little prayer notebook that she always kept with her Bible, a little leaflet with this poem on it. From an old English parsonage down by the sea, there came in the twilight a message for me. Its quaint Saxon legend, deeply engraven, hath, as it seems to me, teaching from heaven. And all through the hours, the quiet words ring like a low inspiration. Do the next thing. Many a questioning, many a fear, many a doubt hath its quieting here. Moment by moment, let down from heaven, time, opportunity, guidance are given. Fear not tomorrow's child of the King. Trust them with Jesus. Do the next thing. Do it immediately, do it with prayer, do it reliantly, casting all care. Do it with reverence, tracing his hand, who placed it before thee with earnest command. Stayed on omnipotence, safe 'neath his wing, leave all resultings. Do the next thing. I can't tell you how many times that has just simplified my life. It is a wonderful thing that God gives us the privilege of working, whatever that work may be. He gives us the quietness, and I love that phrase, moment by moment, let down from heaven, time, opportunity, guidance are given. And we often say, well, we don't have time to do this or that. And of course, we always have exactly the amount of time that God has given to everybody else. We have 24 hours a day, and if we have not been faithful in the use of the time that God has given us, then, of course, we're in big trouble because we've misused the time that God has given us. As I was preparing for my talks of last weekend, I can't even remember where we were last weekend, but I know I think we're in Denver right now, is that right? It was one of those cases where I just knew I couldn't possibly get everything done. And I had a whole lot of ironing to do. I had meals to fix. I had piles of correspondence. I had a few phone calls. I'm always very thankful that my husband fields all the phone calls first, and sometimes he will tell me that I must pick it up. But I had prayers and questionings and fears and doubts. And I remember when my husband Jim died, as was mentioned, along with 4 other American missionaries back in 1956. I was left alone on a jungle station. There was no other missionary there. And it certainly didn't cross my mind to leave, because what would the Indians do? We had about 50 brand new baptized believers just in that 1 year that Jim and Pete had been working there together before Jim and I were married. So I was overwhelmed with the amount of work, because of course there was twice as much work now to be done since Jim was with the Lord. And the Lord reminded me, you only have one thing to do. That's my will. And I will show you how to do the next thing. And he did. I can only say he did. There isn't any way that I can look back and remember how I managed to get through those days and weeks and months and years. I stayed in Ecuador for 8 years after Jim died. And each day's tasks were quietly shown to me. Time, opportunity, guidance was given without fail. Indians would come to the door with all kinds of demands. Perhaps they wanted some worm medicine for their babies, or they wanted me to give a penicillin shot, or they might be telling me, as one boy did, he stood by the kitchen window looking in for a long time, and it was no good trying to find out what the Indians wanted when they came, because they didn't want to tell you anything until they had searched through everything that was going on in the house. They were constantly plastering their faces against the screen. We didn't have glass, but just wanting to know what was going on. So I had gotten over asking, is there something you want? But this boy said, after about 15 minutes, my wife is dying. Well, that can mean anything from a toothache to real death. There's only one word in the Quechua language. So he said, "Nyukawami Wanyung," which means my wife is dying. And so I casually went about the few things I was doing in the kitchen, and I said, well, what is she dying with? Well, the baby didn't come all the way out. So we had about a 30-minute walk to get there. That's just one little example of the sort of things that were great interruptions in the day. But when I got there, it was one of these impossible cases. I was not a midwife. I didn't have any professional training. But a doctor had once showed me one method of getting a breech baby born without killing the baby. And it was the first time in the history of the Quechuas of that area, that a baby actually lived. Normally, they managed to kill the baby in the process of trying to yank it out. But this was just one more thing that God gave me time, opportunity, and guidance about. Doing the next thing. Ever since then, I've been learning quietly to accept what God sends. I had Missionary Aviation Fellowship landing their plane usually once a week or maybe every other week, which meant that I had 40 Indians working under me with their machetes to keep the grass off the airstrip. So I had become the foreman of these 40 Indians, which was Jim's job before. I had a girls' class. I was teaching them to read their own language. I was doing Bible translation work. And I think of that lovely hymn by John Greenleaf Whittier that begins with, "Dear Lord and Father of mankind." And there's a verse that has quieted me many a time. Drop thy still dews of quietness, till all our strivings cease. Take from our souls the strain and stress, and let our ordered lives confess the beauty of thy peace. Let our ordered lives confess the beauty of thy peace. I thank God and I thank my father and mother for creating a peaceful home and showing us how to do things decently and in order. Well, I learned another principle which is very closely related. Do it now. I can hear my mother saying that. Bets, don't postpone it. Do it now. You have a button to sew on a blouse, do it now. Now, I would have that blouse lying on the bed or the chair and walk past it 5 times. And finally, on the 5th time, I would be convicted that I hadn't really obeyed my mother. And I would stop and think, now, how long is it going to take me to do that? Well, maybe all of 3 minutes. Are you a procrastinator? Well, it's still a temptation from time to time, especially when we think we've got too many things to do all at once. So I have a little card in my mirror at home that says, do it now. Send that gift to somebody. Clean the fridge or the toaster. Write a postcard. Do it with prayer, as it says in this thing. Do it immediately. Do it with prayer. Do it reliantly. Casting all care. God doesn't want us to be frantic. He doesn't want us to be overwhelmed. It's quietly, one thing at a time, do the next thing. And I taught that principle to my daughter, and she's a very busy lady now. She's a pastor's wife and the mother of 8 children. And one morning she called me it was about 5 o'clock her time in California, and she said, Mama, I don't know what the next thing is. I could hear the catch in her voice, and I thought, well, with 8 children, who am I to tell her what the next thing is? I've never had more than 1. So I figured she knows 8 times as much as I do about raising children. But she's been very grateful for that little principle too, and has been trying to teach it to those 8 children. When Benedict founded the Benedictine monasteries, one of the rules was that everything was to be done without haste and without sloth. I'm the type that wanted to do things in a slapdash manner just to get it over with, get the thing over with. And I can see exactly the same things in my granddaughter, Elisabeth, who was 18 years old. When she was being homeschooled, I visited there a number of times, and I can just remember seeing her just racing through something and doing a sloppy job. And I thought, oh my goodness, the poor girl, she's got some of her grandmother's genes, so she needs the same lessons that I had to take from my parents. My good friend Donna Otto, who has written a book about how to get more done in less time, says that there are no real procrastinators. They're people who refuse to make decisions. There are no pack rats, she says. You know, we talk about, well, I'm just a pack rat, as though it were something excusable. And Donna says, and I think she's put her finger right on the heart of the matter, that it's the refusal to make decisions. How long have you had that thing? Hudson Taylor, missionary to China, used to go through absolutely everything he owned once a year. And everything that he found in that pile that had not been used in that year, he felt duty-bound either to throw away, give away, or put away. And I don't think he put anything away. That was not on his list. He either threw it away or he gave it away. And in China, it wasn't difficult to find people who needed anything at all that he wanted to give away. So the decision was very easy because he managed to keep stripped down. And I'm not going to go into all the details of what you women know you need to do when you go home. One little tiny suggestion I do make to women is when you buy a new dress or a new pair of shoes, do you take out an old one? Or do you just keep jamming them into the closet? Well, as I told you, this wasn't going to sound very spiritual, what I have to say this afternoon, but everything is an affair of the Spirit. I'm absolutely convinced, and we are to do it with reverence. Leave all resultings is the final thing that I wanted to say about this little principle. Again and again, in the story of my life, which is just a wonderful story. I feel as though I'm the most blessed woman in the whole world. People talk to me about, I don't know how you ever went through what you've gone through. And of course I say to them, well, I could never go through what you've gone through or what you are going through. God knows exactly how to assign the measure of difficulty or suffering that each of us needs. One of my life verses is Psalm 16:5. Lord, you have assigned me my portion and my cup, and have made my lot secure. But there have been many times when obedience to God looked like a very dangerous thing. And one of those times was when I had to make a decision as to whether I was going to go and live with the people that had killed my husband. It wouldn't have taken me 5 minutes to make that decision if I didn't have a child. But I had a 10-month-old baby when Jim was killed. And of course, I knew that I would be risking my life as the 5 men had done. And did I have a right to do that with this child? And I began then to realize obedience is my job. The results of that obedience are God's job. Esther, when she went into the king's palace against the rules, she simply said, if I perish, I perish. My husband and I live on the coast of Massachusetts, and I learned from one of the Coast Guardsmen that there is a motto posted in every Coast Guard station along that stern and rock-bound coast of New England. These are the words: you have to go out. You don't have to come back. Marvelous motto for Christians, isn't it? Imagine being a Coast Guardsman standing on the shore in a violent winter storm, and you look out and there's a ship foundering. Whose job is it to help? Well, of course, the Coast Guard. And the young man looks at that horrible situation and knows that he has to go out. He doesn't have to come back. And Jim Elliot's verse that he wrote in my yearbook as a college student was 2 Timothy 2:4, a soldier on active service will not become entangled in civilian affairs. He must be wholly at his commanding officer's disposal. He knew he was disposable. All 5 of those men knew that very well. And they sang together, we rest on thee, our shield and our defender. We go not forth alone against this foe. Strong in thy strength, safe in thy keeping tender. We rest on thee, and in thy name we go. And you can imagine the irony that those words seem to me at times after the one who calls himself shield and defender had allowed my husband to be speared to death. Does God know what he's doing? He knows exactly what he's doing. And so I want to read these last few lines again. Do it immediately. Do it with prayer. Do it reliantly, casting all care. Do it with reverence, tracing his hand who laid it before thee with earnest command. Stayed on omnipotence, safe neath his wing. Leave all resultings. Do the next thing. God bless you.